Hi, welcome to It's Like This podcast, your common sense mental and spiritual talk show. My name is Dr. Eugene Kim, a dual board certified psychiatrist from Texas. In this podcast, I explain mental and spiritual concepts with fun analogies, real stories, and positive message so you can not just survive, but thrive. My goal for you is to gain understanding, acceptance, and healing so that you can know your worth and live the life that you are meant to live. If you want that as much as I do, hit that subscribe button and let's listen to today's episode. In this episode, we have a special guest, Kelly Neilson. She's a registered dietitian who specializes in intuitive eating and an advocate for healthy at every size movement. Disordered eating and exercise habits and body image issues was like my whole life. Diet culture was so subtle and normal, and it still is today, and it could be detrimental if we're not aware of it. We often have eating disorders or disordered eating habits without knowing because it's so normal. So out of desperation, I stumbled upon intuitive eating and Kelly Neilson. So today, Kelly and I will be discussing what intuitive eating is and what it's not, and how it is so important for our mental health in this crazy, skinny, and health-obsessed world. All right. Thank you for coming to It's Like This podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kim, and we have a special guest for this episode, and Kelly Neilson. She's a registered dietitian, and we got in contact, just out of my need to understand like where I was in my journey and just to share a little bit blurb. I think who I am now and what size I am now is like a product of just series of dieting in my life. And, I was getting really stuck in a rut, and I was just kind of feeling like, is this the end? And I kind of started looking into intuitive eating and healthy at every size and how this is like a blossoming movement. And I got in touch with Kelly Neilson. And so Kelly, thank you so much for coming to It's Like This podcast.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm so happy to be here.
And so tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you do? So let's just start there.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I am a registered dietitian, like you said. I have completed a bachelor's degree in dietetics, and I have a master's degree in dietetic administration. And I also have a private practice called Nutrition for Hope, and I have been doing that for about 6 years. And I help people who are struggling with eating disorders and disordered eating to be able to learn how to have a healthy relationship with food and with their body and kind of be liberated from diet culture.
So you mentioned like two phrases that I'm sure somebody in the audience is not familiar with. So you mentioned, we know eating disorders, like we've heard about it, there are movies about it, but you mentioned disordered eating and then also diet culture. Mm-hmm. So explain to me like what that means.
Yeah, definitely. So like you said, eating disorders are kind of what you are familiar with. There's, anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder. There's, several others, but those are kind of the main ones and most common. But disordered eating is, it can kind of be on a spectrum of, very severe to mild, but it can kind of be dabbling with some of the eating disorder behaviors of restriction or binging. A lot of times I kind of like to think of it as chronic dieting. So people who are consistently going back to dieting and regaining weight and going back to dieting. So like the yo-yo dieting as we know it. There could also be disordered eating where it's kind of like compulsive eating or compulsive overeating. Habits where you're feeling out of control around food. So that's kind of where people are seeking out help with their eating, where they just feel like they don't have a sense of control over what they're doing with food. So that's kind of where I come in with that.
So when you say like chronic dieting, and like, and dabbling here and there with restriction and too much exercise. To me, that sounds like everybody. Like
Yeah.
New Year's,
Yeah.
after a holiday, like let's all sign up for the gym and all that stuff. That sounds like everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I think is so tricky about disordered eating and even eating disorders as well, because people can be engaging in these behaviors and it can be so socially acceptable, so much praised and encouraged, even when people are doing extreme diets, when people are doing extreme exercising, and everyone's like, wow, good for you, look at what you're doing, your weight loss is so amazing, you look so great. And yet what they're engaging in is so unhealthy and extreme and severe in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's where, because it's so everywhere and everybody's doing it, I think that kind of links to that diet culture that you mentioned. We are living in a culture that praises disordered eating, disordered exercise eating habits, and that kind of priority, into thinner the better. And I'm guessing, just correct me if I'm kind of getting that.
Yeah, absolutely. Diet culture is just this culture we live in, the society that promotes dieting, weight loss, kind of in the name of health or in the name of fitness or in the name of um elevating your status in a lot of ways,
Mm-hmm.
of being able to diet and lose weight. And it's just everywhere. Honestly, it's in the movies we watch, TV shows, media, social media, conversations with friends. It's just almost like you can't really escape diet culture because it's all around you. There's a registered dietitian who also is in this field of intuitive eating. Her name is Christy Harrison, and she defines diet culture as a system of beliefs that worships thinness and equates it to health and moral virtue. So there's a lot of like morality that's wrapped up in it, thinking like, oh, I'm such a better person because I'm staying on top of my eating and exercise, and I'm at least pursuing thinness, than just to be lazy or whatever is kind of seen as being morally inferior.
Mm. I like that. There's like morality connected to it. And I definitely want to continue more about that, because I think a sense of morality is all in us and we get fixated on things to prove our moral status. But good stuff. I took a note down, but let's kind of go back to how you got interested in, were you always interested in this? Like when you were getting your master's and bachelor's, or like, how did it show up in your journey as a registered dietitian?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I will try to go through it quickly because it can kind of be a fun topic.
Yeah.
But it really goes back to when I was quite younger. I actually just full disclosure, I've never had an eating disorder in my life. I've always loved food and always I grew up in kind of a foodie family, and I've always been fascinated by nutrition, fascinated by digestion. And when I learned about eating disorders, I think I learned about them in school. It just like my mind really clung on to that and just thought it was so fascinating that this mental disease could kind of overthrow our survival instincts of pursuing food.
Yeah.
And that the pursuit of thinness could be so strong that it could also go against that survival instinct. So I was also always like super interested in it. In high school, I would do research papers on it and just look into it. I just was like, I don't know, I loved studying it and learning about it. And I initially wanted to be a therapist and help people with eating disorders. And through my journey of discovery in college, I just decided that therapy wasn't my avenue, but because I had such a strong interest in food and nutrition and digestion, I found dietetics, and that immediately clicked for me. When I was in school, I had ironically decided I didn't want to do eating disorders. I thought it was going to be too complicated and too psychological. It kind of scared me a little bit, to be honest.
Yep.
But you know, I had learned about intuitive eating in school as well, just kind of like in passing. They had mentioned it, not really too much in depth. But once I became a dietitian, I was just applying for jobs everywhere, honestly, just so excited to work as a dietitian. And my first job that I got was at an eating disorder treatment center in Utah called the Center for Change. And that completely changed my life and my career. I fell in love with the population of, you know, people struggling with eating disorders and disordered eating. And that's really where I learned about how intuitive eating can help people struggling in that area, and how it can help them find peace with food and help be that solution to their eating disorder. So, you know, I worked at the Center for Change for 2 years, and then I had to end up moving for my husband's career. And that's when I started my private practice. So that's kind of an overview of it.
So you didn't start out like crazy about intuitive eating, but you saw the power of intuitive eating concepts and beliefs to offset the eating disorder. But I'm guessing that you realize that disordered eating and diet culture is bigger than the population of eating disorder.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And just that, like I was saying earlier, disordered eating is so common. I think especially since the pandemic, of course, in so many different ways of people kind of picking up some disordered behaviors through that. But disordered eating really does have a lot in common with eating disorders, although it's not quite as severe, clinically severe.
Right.
There is a lot of overlap. And so where intuitive eating is, you know, a really helpful solution for people struggling with eating disorders, it's also incredibly useful for disordered eating.
So kind of like you're saying, disordered eating is influenced by diet culture that we all live in, and it's very subtle. It could be very obvious as bodybuilding, but it could be very subtle as signing up for a gym in a New Year's. You know, that urge to like be that. So diet culture can be a spectrum. It affects disorder eating to a spectrum, and eating disorder is like the extreme of that spectrum. Am I kind of catching it?
Yeah, definitely. And it honestly, even though this sounds cliche, it can be very much a slippery slope from disordered eating into eating disorders. It's very easy to, you know, not see the results that you want. And so getting further and further into more and more severe behaviors into an eating disorder. And so,
yeah.
You know, there are lots of things that cause eating disorders, and it's almost like a perfect storm. And so this doesn't obviously happen for everybody, but it can be a very easy gateway into an eating disorder by starting those disordered eating behaviors.
Yeah.
Real quick, sorry, one disordered eating that I forgot to mention, but is also very important because I mentioned the kind of overeating aspect of disordered eating. There's also a disordered eating called orthorexia. And that is not officially in the DSM-5 criteria for eating disorders, although it is starting to be campaigned to be included because it is starting to be more, I guess it is very common, and it's starting to be more prevalent. But orthorexia is kind of the unhealthy obsession with healthy eating, of when, you know, individuals can be so obsessed with healthy eating that it's actually unhealthy because they're so focused on it. And that may be restricting food groups, that may be, you know, looking like trying to eat very quote unquote clean all the time, or obsessive about exercise routines and things like that. But that's kind of the antithesis of orthorexia and what it can be. So, yeah.
So I think we're hitting really good ones. So like, I just want to talk about diet culture, because I bet you people who did not hear about intuitive eating or even recognize that there's disordered eating is like we are kind of tackling is so common, is so normal. But if I'm conceptualizing, we brought up the root cause of morality, and we touched on self-discipline, for the sake of self-discipline, for the sake of being accepted, being thinner or being healthy. And underneath it all, though, I sense a lot of insecurity, in a sense that I just want to be proven. I just want to be accepted. I just want to be loved and respected. But then there's also this aspect of like, I can't trust, hence the word instinct, my intuition of hunger cues, survival cues. Like, so for this, you mentioned like, it was amazing how the mental need, emotional need surpassed the survival need of being fed. And I think there's a connection of being morally right, being disciplined, being accepted, being loved, being cherished, compensated of neglecting your intuitions, intuition's instinct to survive and be fed and be nurtured.
Right.
We're kind of going quasi spiritual and mental. And I know that you didn't like psychology, but I just see so much connection in that. And how do you see that day to day?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, diet culture is pretty much driven by the dieting industry, which diet and weight loss industry is worth $80 billion or something to that degree. And so there is a lot of money in that field, and their whole business model is staked on kind of preying on people's insecurities. And it is to their advantage to make everyone feel like they need to lose weight and to make everyone feel like their body is not good enough as it is today, and to buy into their products, their dieting, their, program, whatever it is. So that's largely where a lot of this is driving. And truthfully, sadly enough, they do influence a lot of research on weight loss and the information that we have on weight loss, because it is to their advantage, So they fund a lot of those studies and where some of that information comes from. But that could be a whole other podcast in itself.
Oh, yeah. I think take-home message is where the money's at. Watch out. Yeah. Like, who's paying for that research? Who's paying for that advertisement?
Exactly.
Who's paying for these organizations? Yeah.
So it's definitely to their advantage to prey on our insecurities. And, it's just promoted everywhere. And so I think diet culture is one of those things that, Christy Harrison also talks about this in her podcast called Food Psych about diet culture. She's kind of, I mentioned her because she's kind of a pioneer in this field where she has made this distinct definition of what diet culture is. And, so that's why I mentioned her, but she's described diet culture as kind of being like water that we're all swimming in. And, the fish don't know that they're wet because they're just in the water. And so diet culture can be kind of a shock and a surprise for people to learn about, because they're like, what? That's just normal. It's just what life is. But once you start seeing it for what it is and what it does to us and our mentalities around food and our body, then you almost can't unsee it.
Yeah. And you mentioned the research that's being funded by these businesses. And, I'm a physician, you're a registered dietitian. Intuitive eating is not really a popular, well-received in both of our fields, and it must be confusing as it is for me. When I hear intuitive eating, you're like, what? Like, thinner is healthier, and there's a lot of biases that I picked up on, from medical school, like, and we're getting harped on this, like nutrition is not told or taught, in medical school, because we just have to cover so many grounds in such a short amount of time. But like registered dietitians, there's a lot of people, I met a dietitian who does calorie counting, who says, oh, carbs, low carb and all that keto, all that stuff. They promote Whole30, all that stuff. So it's almost like physicians and dietitians are in the water too. Mm-hmm. And we're promoting this lifestyle to people.
Yeah, I mean, it is extremely common for physicians and dietitians to be promoting weight loss, and truthfully, like, that's what people want. That's what people are willing to pay for, because of all these constant messages that they're receiving about what their body needs to look like, what their body needs to be. And I think that a lot of times research can be biased by diet culture. A lot of times physicians can be biased by diet culture, and not even really realizing that they have that bias, but that's just where the training kind of comes from. And yeah, I can attest to when I was in school to be a dietitian, that was taught to us how to help people lose weight, and what to do and how to counsel them in that. And so, even though I know how to help somebody lose weight, I don't feel like I ethically could help somebody lose weight, because I know the damage that it causes physically, mentally, psychologically, spiritually, all of those things that the pursuit of dieting does to you as a person. I don't feel comfortable helping people with that.
Yeah. No. So we talked enough about how even the professionals in health, we're all in this water, we're all swimming, and we're all going somewhere. But it seems like intuitive eating and healthy at every size concept is kind of swimming upstream, and it's harder. It's difficult to see, but like you said, once you see it, once you swim upstream, it's really hard to just, let yourself be passive. So let me kind of ask you, so you're saying that intuitive eating is like an antidote to our diet culture. So can you explain to me the concepts and foundation of intuitive eating?
Yeah. So intuitive eating is this philosophy with eating in kind of a way of life, actually, a way of seeing food and your body, but it is comprised of 10 principles. So it's kind of hard to describe in one sentence, but it's essentially learning how to get back to our roots of how we were born into this world, with the ability to be able to eat when we're hungry and stop when we're full. All babies know how to do that, and nobody had to teach them that. And so we all have these innate cues that tell us when to eat, how much to eat, when to stop, things like that. And throughout our lives, through, parenting, diet culture, different things, we are taught to mistrust our bodies, and that we don't know when we're hungry, and we don't know when we're full. And so a lot of times those come to question, or when you go on a diet, you can be very distanced from those cues, or you have to numb your hunger for a while, things like that. And so intuitive eating is teaching you to get back to learning how to trust your body, being able to nourish yourself consistently so your body can trust you. And it's not only learning how to respond to those innate cues, but it's also learning how to incorporate your emotions into it, and also learning how to bring wisdom into it. So one way that I heard it explained was by one of the authors of the book Intuitive Eating. Her name is Elise Resch. She described it as a combination of kind of 3 parts of our brain. So she says that it's a combination of our reptilian brain, which is that stimulus response part of our brain where we feel those cues, we respond. But it's also, in addition, our mammalian brain, which helps to bring in those emotions. If you have dogs and cats, they feel emotions. And so we as mammals have that ability as well. And we can't discount the role that it plays in our food choices, in our body decisions. So it's taking those innate cues, the reptilian brain, combining it with the mammalian brain, but we don't stop there because we as humans also have this higher level thinking, logical brain that allows us to look at the stimulus, look at our emotions about the stimulus, and make an informed decision about that. And so I know this is all sounding very complicated, but hopefully that helps explain what intuitive eating is about, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions that if people hear about intuitive eating, they think it's just quote unquote, like eat whatever you want, whenever you want. And that's absolutely not what it is. Sure, it's part of it to be able to allow yourself unconditional permission to eat. That is one of the main pillars of intuitive eating. But you have to allow yourself unconditional permission to eat, meaning there are no good foods, no bad foods, but you're also considering your health. You're considering what sounds good to you to eat. You're considering what feels good for you to eat. And so it's not just throwing caution to the wind and eating on the fly whenever you feel like it. It's definitely bringing in wisdom to that.
Yeah. And then I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I think if anyone's listening or even finding out intuitive eating, we automatically reject it because you're like, what? Then I'm going to eat chocolate chip cookies and cake all day. Like I can't trust myself, and I think that's the most common misconception. But I like that there's an aspect of discipline and wisdom in it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I will mention, if anybody's listening that is currently struggling with an eating disorder or disordered eating, it is very difficult to try to do intuitive eating on your own. I've had many, many clients come and say, like, I read the intuitive eating book and like, it didn't work. So I don't think that approach is good for me. It's really hard to do on your own when you're coming from that place, because like I said, you're so detached from your internal cues that you can't fully jump into intuitive eating in that way. And you absolutely need to have a practitioner, a dietitian that is familiar with intuitive eating that can help guide you through that and help where to put structure, where to have flexibility, where to have permission, and give you that guidance so that you're not just trying to flounder through the whole thing.
Yeah.
Is what it kind of feels like, I suppose.
What are some of the common myths or misconceptions about intuitive eating?
Yeah, I mentioned the people think that it's just eating whatever you want. That's a really big one. I think that there's also a misconception that it's disregarding health. And this also goes back to diet culture's message that health is equated to body size. Because in intuitive eating, we do not focus on weight loss. And I think that's another reason why it's so countercultural, because people do want to lose weight.
Yeah.
But what intuitive eating teaches is, the very first principle of intuitive eating is actually reject the diet mentality, because it's through the diet mentality of pursuing weight loss that can promote or exacerbate many disordered eating behaviors. So it talks about the psychology of deprivation. And when you're deprived of something, food or any other thing, it makes you think about that thing and obsess about that thing over and over again. And that's part of our survival mechanism. When your body's not getting enough food, it's trying to get you to seek out food. So being able to reject the diet mentality is extremely helpful for being able to be an intuitive eater. And if you're pursuing weight loss, you will be, in one sense or another, deprived. That's just how it works, whether you're cutting back calories, whether you're cutting out food groups, or whatever it is, whatever you're trying to do to lose weight, you're trying to create a deficit, right? And by that deficit, you are being deprived of something that your body needs. Through that deprivation, it's going to be turning on all of these alarm bells in your body, so to speak. We have this whole beautiful biological cascade of events that happens when our body is in starvation mode. And its whole purpose is to help you to get get you to eat. So that's where you get people who feel like they're addicted to food, which they're not really addicted to food. It's really just their body trying to get them to eat, and almost saying, in a sense, okay, you're not taking care of me and getting me the food that I need. So I'm taking the reins and I'm going to get you to eat by making you think about food more, by making you crave foods that are higher in calories. That's going to give you more bang for your buck. That's going to be, maybe decreasing your inhibitions around food so that you're more likely to go ahead and eat. That's going to, that's where people will feel out of control around food, because once they start eating, they're like, I can't stop.
Yeah.
Because
it's like a child. Like, if you're not meeting and nurturing its needs and listening to his, request or, whatever, like eventually you're going to have a toddler throwing a tantrum. Or sometimes, I think this is all just true, a toddler who checks out and who's very indifferent towards you. And it's like, well, what's the point of telling mom that I am hungry, because she's not going to listen to me? So sometimes, like, I think that's kind of a little bit of like when your body, metabolism goes down, like your body's checked out and it's in a starvation mode, and it's sadly in a point of acceptance of that.
Right. And you mentioned the fear that people have. This is going along with like the misconceptions, but you mentioned that a lot of people have the fear, which is completely legitimate, of like, oh, if I'm like letting myself eat whatever foods, then I'm only going to eat chocolate chip cookies and fast food all day long. And I hear that all the time from my clients, that like, you're telling me to just eat anything. And I'm like, yeah, but we address those fears and talk about them, because if that's been your experience, that when you allow yourself to eat chocolate chip cookies, when you've been deprived from them and you eat the whole plate, then yeah, that's going to be your thought that's going to happen in the future. But it's recognizing that it's not the chocolate chip cookies that caused you to eat all of them. It's the deprivation from the chocolate chip cookies that caused you to eat all of them.
Yeah.
And there's two kinds of deprivation as well. I know this is a little bit of a tangent, but it helps to understand. There's mental deprivation and there's physical deprivation. So you could be physically avoiding the food and saying like, I'm never going to eat that. Or you could be eating it and telling yourself mentally, this is so bad. This is so wrong. I shouldn't be eating this. I need to hide. I've got to eat this in secret. Like, those are all the mental deprivation. And so even if anybody's listening and you're like, well, I eat everything, but if you're telling yourself like, oh, this is a bad food, that's part of that deprivation. And that can come back in the form of making you kind of feel out of control around that food. So anyways, back onto what I was saying before about how people feel or are worried about, binging or overeating or eating only on this one kind of food. There's this concept taught in intuitive eating called habituation. And this is true with not just food, but with anything in our lives. When we have free access to something, it kind of begins to lose its novelty, and the excitement wears off. Right. So like if you buy new clothes, they're fun for a little while and then they're not fun anymore, So kind of the same thing with food. And initially when people are making peace with food and I'm encouraging them to explore all the foods that they have previously forbidden and start incorporating them in their life, yes, those foods are more commonly eaten and they may eat more of those foods initially. But over time, as your body and your mind continue to trust that those foods are truly not going anywhere and that you will continue to include them, there's no like conditional, like, okay, if this doesn't work in 2 weeks, then I'm taking it out, that you continually have that open-ended permission, that you will start to want to have balance. And that, even if you initially start eating ice cream every single day, you'll be like, yeah, okay, I don't think I want this every day anymore. It stops losing its power. So
I think there's something to be said that there is something called food addiction, and I think that's what people are afraid of. Like, I am going to be addicted to food. But I think what you mentioned is words like wisdom, peace, and nurture, and trust. And those are some of the spiritual concepts that is hard to do it by yourself, So it's like, I think everybody's kind of like either addicted to food and deprived of food, and you're swinging back and forth. Like the pendulum is always going back and forth. But I think you mentioned like this is why it's so hard to do it by yourself, even if you had head knowledge, because the dietitian who's very sound in intuitive eating concepts would be like, yeah, so you ate the whole plate of cookie. Like, how did you feel? You can check those kind of pendulum swings. And I think that's the key of having a professional guide you so that you stop swinging back and forth, which is what everybody does. Like holidays, we're addicted to food and then we're deprived of food in January 1st, and
Yeah.
I think a professional can like cut through that.
Right. Well, and I kind of want to hang out in food addiction for a second, because this is such a hot topic right now.
Yeah.
And such a big fear that a lot of people have. But this concept of food addiction is very interesting because, like I mentioned before, it's this feeling of being out of control with food is actually driven by being deprived,
Yeah,
or under eating, or withholding of those things. And so it's actually not a true addiction, because addictions to alcohol, sex, drugs, things like that, it's through abstinence that you're able to be relieved from that addiction. But we can't be abstinent from food. And that it's actually, if you do try to avoid certain foods, or if you do try to restrict yourself or restrain yourself, that's what drives the disordered behavior. And so it's psychologically different than other standard addictions. It may feel like, I do want to acknowledge that individuals are stuck in this cycle, do feel like it is an addiction, and do feel that loss of control.
Yeah.
But it is so different, because it's actually through bringing in and embracing those foods that they were avoiding that releases them from the so-called addiction. And
that's so good.
It's possible that they may be addicted to the behavior, or they may be addicted to the compulsive nature of it, but it's not the food in particular. And there are a lot of arguments about, food causing the what is it, like the dopamine receptors in our brain to light, just like it does with cocaine, or just like it does with alcohol. And there are arguments like that, but that same center in our brain also lights up when we listen to music.
Yeah.
Or when we cuddle a baby. There's also those life-sustaining practices or behaviors that also light up the dopamine receptors in our brain. So it doesn't mean just because it's being lit up in the same way that it is with cocaine, that it's equal as cocaine.
As a psychiatrist, I can say that dopamine is just one of many neurotransmitters that sends out messages to different parts of your message. So I think it's so hard to even simplify that dopamine means addiction. Like dopamine is a reward system, just like you said, you get rewards by listening to music, rewards by exercise, and so in a sense, you're 100% right. Dopamine does not mean addiction, and I think people, probably
they try to oversimplify it. Absolutely. Because it's easy to try to villainize food. Again, going back to diet culture, like diet culture benefits from us villainizing food and having that belief that like, oh, these things are bad, or, oh, I can't have this because of this, or I can't trust myself around food. And all of those insecurities around food drive us further into diet culture and buying into the products that will help, quote unquote, solve those issues.
This is just kind of me thinking out loud. One thing that I love about intuitive eating is just cutting the crap of influences around us. And, because the deep inside of us are insecure and we don't know what to trust. And we see documentaries of like, was it Fork Over Food or like animal industry? And you're like, like there's monies going onto the animal farms and it's unethical. And then now you feel more insecure, or like, I don't know. There's so many documentaries out there that helps us mistrust anything,
Right.
including our cues. So we hear, advice like, oh, when you're hungry, drink a cup of water. See, you were actually thirsty, not hungry. Or like if your body weight is this, then your metabolism is this. So you should eat this amount of calories. We don't trust our cues. We trust the numbers spitting out in our face, and like little tips and tricks to bypass our hunger cues. And it, there's so much fear in food. So there's Whole30, vegan, vegetarian or keto. And it's just so confusing. And I think intuitive eating is like, let's just cut the crap. Let's just go back to the basics.
Right.
And you'll be okay. And you're fine. I think it's almost the message like, you're fine. You don't need to listen to this crap.
Absolutely. And it's just like, let's eliminate the fear around food. We don't need to be afraid about food. And I think that's what so many of those documentaries are seeking out to do, is to make people nervous about food. Look where your food's coming from. Look what you're eating. Look what you're supporting and what you're buying into. And we just don't need to be so afraid about food. It's a lot more simple than that. And I mean, with those documentaries, I know we've all seen them. You just, like anything else, have to take it with a huge grain of salt. They're hugely biased, and they're definitely going to only be showing you the interviews that support their thesis, and only going to be putting forth their point.
Yeah.
And so just, make sure that when you're watching those, that you're not taking it as fact, but you're just kind of like, okay, this is interesting. This is one side of the story, but, obviously they're not going to be showing you all of the opposing sides.
Yeah. And documentaries are helpful. I think they're helpful, but and just like we talked about, where is the money at, right? The money's at the diet industry. Also, money's at the making people fat industry. And I think you and I had this conversation, like, there's money getting spit out in all directions. But I think what intuitive eating does is, let's just cut the crap. Let's just nurture and take care of you, and you're okay. Like, healthy at every size. You're accepted whatever size you are. So
yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, definitely. And I do want to touch on health at every size a little bit, because that also has a lot of misconceptions around it. And there's a lot of contention and uncomfortable feelings around the concept of health at every size. And I think a lot of it does come from diet culture and the information that we have about body size, and that what we think we know about body size.
Right.
So it's called health at every size. It's not actually healthy at every size, because we're not trying to say that every person is healthy at the size that they currently are, no matter what. But health at every size is saying that every person has the right and the ability to be healthy at the size that they are, if they want that. If that makes sense. So it's different than saying, oh, they're already healthy, everybody's fine just the way they are, as opposed to like, you can be healthy without having to change your weight. That weight does not equate health, and that our body size is far more complicated and complex than just a calories in versus calories out rhetoric that we've been told. So it's multifactorial of where, what our body size is, and where it's meant to be, and what our body needs to be at in order to be healthy, and that we can no longer rely on the BMI scale to be telling us what's healthy or not, because it's an arbitrary scale that doesn't even it's not accurate.
Yeah, it's trying to simplify something that's so complex, because we all know now that there's a certain thing called skinny fat. You can be skinny, but really, really unhealthy, so it's just kind of removing the size out of the equation.
Yeah. And truthfully, looking at like health at every size focuses on your behaviors, because health is not a body size. You cannot look at a person's exterior and say, oh, that person is healthy or that person is unhealthy. You have to really look at their behaviors, because even if a person appears healthy, like you're saying from the outside, they could be binging and purging every day and you not know it. They could be obsessed with exercise. They could be dieting. They could be restricting. They could be, who knows? Like they could just only be eating meat or only be eating, it's just like,
Yeah.
you don't know what's going on unless you look at the behaviors. And there's also so much more to health than just what you eat and how you move. How are you sleeping? What's your social life? What's your psychological life? What's your spiritual life? Like there's just so much that goes into health that I think it's so much focused and the pressure is put on, you have to eat perfectly, you have to exercise this much every day, when in reality, like that's not all it is reliant on.
Yeah. And just to kind of tie it to, the last episode that I did on depression, it was like worth, your sense of worth. The world will try to measure you by popularity, like how you're seen outside, what is your market value, productivity, like, are you achieving the goals that society has set for you, which in this case is be healthy, quote unquote, and be fit, quote unquote, and be thinner, and also appraisal of like what your family says, what your doctor says, even sometimes, but it's just kind of like, let's just kind of cut the crap and like think about what you think of yourself. Like, how are you doing mentally, emotionally? Like, I just, I just gravitated towards intuitive eating as I'm kind of learning more about it and applying to myself, that there's a huge component of wholesomeness, and acceptance and trusting your intuition and like being proud of who you are, and the progress that you're making. So to me, it's just like definition of health.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I cannot even tell you I mean, this is one of the reasons why I am so passionate about intuitive eating, because I can see it changing people's lives on so many different levels, that when people are able to start being confident with food and that they're not feeling like they're out of control with food all the time, it actually can help increase their self-esteem and their self-worth, because they feel like they have choices. They feel like they have the ability to choose, and it just helps them feel more secure as a person living in this world. And body image is a very difficult and complicated concept, and I think it does help promote body image. That's not to say that somebody doing intuitive eating, their body image concerns are not healed in the moment of being an intuitive eater, but it's definitely a huge part of the process and can help you feel more confident and secure in yourself as you are able to be more confident in your food choices and the way that you are able to live around food.
Yeah. And we're around food all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Always there.
Yeah. I love that. So, Kelly Neilson, if you had a words of wisdom or advice, I'm sure the audience is in a wide spectrum of, their journey with food and eating and self-esteem and all that stuff. Like, what is your advice and wisdom for them?
Oh my goodness. I feel like
I'm putting you on the spot. Yeah, I know, it's so hard.
How much longer do you want me to take? No, I'm just kidding. Because I could go on, but I mean, if I could boil it down, I think just really consider intuitive eating. If you are struggling with disordered eating or an eating disorder, really consider that and consider seeking out help, because being able to have that freedom with food is just so transformative for you in your life and can help you, like I was saying, kind of permeate to different aspects of your life as you're able to feel like you're in charge of your eating choices, and that you don't have to be scared of that anymore, that you're not obsessing about it and pouring in so much of your time, your money, your energy into your food choices, and that it can start to be a little bit more effortless and more natural. You're able to spend your focus in your life on your life's purpose and what you are meant to do, your passions in your life, and creating and loving and all of those things, because you're not so obsessed with food. So I think, yeah, my advice is consider intuitive eating. And, we really didn't have time to go much into weight stigma and health at every size, but just knowing that you do not have to change your body size in order to be healthy. Don't buy into that message from diet culture that you have to be healthy in order to be, that you have to be smaller in order to be healthy. That is not true. But as you start focusing on what are healthy behaviors in my life that I can adopt, that's how you can attain true health. And you will notice you'll have more energy, you will have more confidence, you will feel better throughout the day. And in a sense, your relationships can be better because you won't be withdrawing as much as you're diving into diet culture. So yeah, there's just so many areas of your life that it can benefit. And I've staked my whole career on it. I love intuitive eating. I'm extremely passionate about it. I have seen firsthand in all of my clients the ways that it changes their lives and helps them to live their best lives. So I love it. And that's why I'm here. It's just great.
When you were talking about that, I can just feel your passion, to swim upstream, and that in itself is so hard, so I just enjoyed our discussion together, and thank you so much. Just, talking to me about it and, teaching to me about it. So if they're I really enjoyed this podcast episode, I really want to know about, what Kelly Neilson does, how could they find you?
Yeah. So my website is nutritionforhope.com. That's the name of my practice. You can find me there. I'm also on Instagram at Nutrition for Hope. So that's a great place to find me. I had just taken a long hiatus from Instagram, but I'm back in and starting to come out with new content. So yeah. I'm excited to support you there.
Yeah. And all that information will be in the descriptions box below so that you can kind of reach Kelly Neilson and just kind of bounce back ideas, and, this whole point of this podcast is to really kind of, as is going on, freeing you and myself from these influences that really hinders us. And I really like that you said that you can live your life, the life that you want to, when you start to worry and obsess less about things that doesn't really matter that much, in that direction. So I really just love that kind of statement. So, thank you for being here, and thank you everybody for listening to this podcast episode. Like I said, her Instagram and email and website will be in the description box below. And again, thank you, Kelly Neilson, for joining us.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.